Ladies and gentlemen, I have cracked the code. I believe I have discovered Donald Trump's secret plan. You see, by sending in law enforcement officers to enforce the law, he is trying to convince people to vote for him because people don't like lawlessness. I know, it sounds crazy, but I think this may be his plan for re-election. Who could believe such a dastardly deed carried out by the president? In all seriousness, though, I believe we are seeing a strategy employed by Donald Trump, which is roping Democrats into a trap, as I stated the other day. But now we have more evidence. You see, court documents reveal that Donald Trump is engaging in something called Operation Diligent Valor, which is sending over 100 federal law enforcement officers to protect federal courthouses in Portland and I believe across the country. So we'll talk about this. But there's something I have to show you from a little bit ago that proves I think Trump knows what he's doing. I believe he absolutely has a plan. And this story from Chicago back on June 8th, I believe proves it. Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Alderman Raymond Lopez have foul-mouthed argument over looting. You're 100% full of S, Mayor says. You see, back at the peak of the riots, there was an alderman who was complaining that the riots and violence was breaking out into neighborhoods because the mayor had raised bridges in downtown Chicago, forcing the rioters into residential areas. What does this show us? So long as Donald Trump keeps the violence in downtown areas, then people in the suburbs are going to be happy the violence isn't reaching them. I was thinking about this because when the riots were reaching their peak, and I've mentioned this several times, I heard helicopters near my house in the suburbs, and it's kind of freaky. I talked to some of my friends and family in Chicago who were in the far west suburbs who said, yes, they made it out here. I am confident that the leaders of these areas do not want violence coming to their area, and they don't care who stops it or why. They just don't want it there. But first, let's take a look at Trump's plan, what he's doing with Operation Diligent Valor, and how the Democrats actually think that Trump is testing federal authority in Portland. This says to me that Donald Trump has a plan, that Republicans have a plan, and what we're seeing with the violence and Ted Wheeler coming out and supporting these protests, I think that shows the left has become a chaotic, destructive force. They're engaging in riots and violence. They're initiating the conflict by going to these areas, but they have no plan. And Trump does. And even they say it. I'm going to say it again. Whether it is 4D chess or whatever you want to call it, Trump knows what he's doing and why he's doing it. Take a look at this story. First, what is going on in Portland? You see, a lot of people are confusing Operation Diligent Valor, which we have just learned about, with Operation Legend. Trump announced Operation Legend would see the deployment of DEA agents, FBI agents, and ATF to various cities to assist with law enforcement. You see, crime is skyrocketing. Once again, people in the neighborhoods, they're probably happy about this. People in suburbs, they're happy about this. It's law enforcement that will keep the chaos away from them. First, let's read this. Reuters says the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has deployed more than 100 federal agents to Portland, Oregon, on a mission named Operation Diligent Valor to patrol government buildings as anti-racism protests flared this month, court documents show. The documents filed on Tuesday helped shed light on what had been a secretive operation that involved days of violent clashes between unidentified federal law enforcement officers and anti-racist protesters outside a federal courthouse. I got to stop right there. This is not true. Reuters, do better. The law enforcement officers are wearing identifying information. They have badge numbers on their arms. They have their which department they're with, and they're wearing police patches on their chests. Could they do better? That's a different argument, but they are easily identifiable. This is just not true. The operation has involved the Department of Homeland Security's Rapid Deployment Force. It stepped up its response to increasingly violent attacks in the Oregon city on July 4th, the day after a group of people broke into the courthouse, according to the affidavit by the Federal Protective Services Regional Director Gabriel Russell. Now, if you are someone who only watches the mainstream media, I'm not talking to you because you're watching me. But to those of you who know people who only watch mainstream media, they probably don't know this. That was only after the far leftists broke into the courthouse that the feds actually engaged and tried to break them up and clear them out. Since then, it has been now 55 nights of riots with even the mayor of Portland joining in, and that is the trap. Trump got him. You see, we've known for a while. Maybe Trump saw what was happening in Chicago, where so for those that aren't familiar, in Chicago, aldermen are like neighborhood politicians. They're like, they're like the guy you elect for your neighborhood because Chicago's big. They're complaining to the mayor saying, like, when you do this and you get these rioters out of downtown, they come to our houses. Keep it down there. We don't want it down here. Yes, it's a game of hot potato. Maybe Trump saw that. Maybe the people in Trump's administration, the people working for DHS, noticed that, hey, regular people don't want violence anywhere near them. So if you're going to keep it somewhere, keep it downtown. And so Trump said, okay, let's send out law enforcement to to this federal court area, to our building, and engage the rioters there so they don't go out to the neighborhoods. And then we win the suburbs. That's the plan, right? Yeah, it seems to be. They say on the here's what it says. The affidavit was filed by the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Marshal Service as part of a broader lawsuit brought by journalists against the city of Portland and those agencies. The plaintiffs claim that police had attempted to intimidate the press by attacking journalists. On the morning of the 4th of July, DHS Rapid Deployment Force implemented tactics intended to positively identify and arrest serious offenders for crimes, such as assault, while protecting the rights of individuals engaged in protective free speech activity, Russell wrote of the operation. According to the document, there are currently 114 federal law enforcement officers in Portland to patrol federal buildings, including personnel from the FPS, ICE, U.S. Marshal Service, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The crackdown in the city has drawn criticism, blah, blah, blah. Sure. Let me show you what they write over at the New York Times. And then I'll break down some propaganda for you. We'll talk about the media and why I think Trump is winning on this one. 50 nights of unrest in Portland. Robert Evans of Bellingcat says the city, quote, is being used as a bellwether to see what this administration can get away with. I'm sorry. I gotta say this, man. When you look at alternative news personalities, you get a semi-unified vision of what's happening. We watch the videos. We tell you what's going on. As it turns out, on July 4th, they breached the courthouse. Then the feds responded. When you turn to the mainstream media, you get conflicting and chaotic narratives that you can't really follow. Let me ask you, is the city being used as a bellwether to see what this administration can get away with? Or are federal agents being forced to retreat into their Portland base because protesters control the streets? This is The Guardian. The Guardian is not a right-wing outlet. In fact, The Guardian's fairly left-wing. Are they winning or losing? Are the feds an occupying force, or are they forced to retreat into their building? Which is it? Honestly, it's hard to track if you just read mainstream news. But again, if you're following moderate, conservative, and independent news sources, you probably have a better understanding of what's going on. And I would argue the same is true for Donald Trump. The left, it has become chaos, and I wonder why. One of the reasons I feel that they've become completely chaotic and just disassembled is because the internet has created two factions. I'm not saying every single person, but it seems like you have a group of people who are investigating, inquisitive, curious, open-minded, and you have people who just believe whatever headline they read or silly meme. The example I often cite, according to Newswhip in 2018, conservatives mostly engaged with Fox News. Liberals, or leftists, what do you want to call them, mostly engaged with Occupy Democrats. If you're not familiar with what this means, Fox News is biased, but they're a legitimate news source. They will tell you in an article, hey, feds are doing this thing. Occupy Democrats will repost half-baked memes that are often fake news, entirely made up, falsely framed, or conspiratorial. And now I see, for the most part, from more right-leaning and moderate individuals, sharing of news articles. The left shares screen grabs of tweets. And even if they do share these stories, which is it? Are federal agents forced to retreat because protesters control the streets? Or is this the administration trying to see what they can get away with? Are they an occupying secret police force, or are they pathetic and unable to control things? You figure it out. Right now, we often see the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro dominating on Facebook. So I think what you can really see is that if you are someone who actually reads the news and follows multiple sources, you want to know why I have the screen set up the way it is with my face in the corner and there's a source? I used to actually do hard edits where you would see me in the entire screen. And then I would be like, here's a source, and then I would read a quote. But then people would share the clips of just me talking, acting like it wasn't cited properly. Well, now you can see when I'm saying it, it's right in front of me. I am trying to make sure anybody who engages will see this is sourced news. I use a third-party rating agency so we can see what's going on. The left, however, tends not to do this. They're sharing memes for news. I swear, and listen, they take their heed from nonprofit organizations that are trying to fundraise off of this. And there you go. So they say that, the right is grifting and whatever. Okay. I post based on sources, and that's it. But when you see nonprofits saying that Trump is, doing whatever, you gotta donate to us to help fight Trump, don't believe it. They're just trying to shock you into giving them money. Now, they'll say the same thing about me, clickbait headlines and articles and whatever. I'll show you all my sources. I'll break down what I think. And what I think right now is the right has an understanding of what's going on. And whatever this right means, I don't know, because it's got liberals in it and conservatives. And it's just like people who want to vote for America, I guess. The left is random. It's almost completely random. This is why they often fight among themselves. It's why they have no plan. And it's why we see stories like this. This, to me, this is the evidence that Trump knows if Trump was between a rock and a hard place, and no matter what he did, it was going to be bad. He knows keep the violence downtown and the suburbs will celebrate. Take a look at this story. I covered this when it first happened, but I want to show you this. An alderman, a local politician, contacted the mayor. They were doing this conference call. And so here's what we have. There's audio leaked. It's actually leaked audio. A source provided CBS 2 with audio from the call between the mayor held with aldermen that day, in which one of the aldermen, Lopez, said the mayor's office needed to come up with a better plan to protect the neighborhoods in the coming days. Quote, when downtown is in lockdown, our neighborhoods are next, and our failure to fully get ready for what is going on in the neighborhoods, we're seeing this destruction, and we're thinking that it's going to somehow end tonight. We have seen where in other cities this has gone on for days, and we need to come up with a better plan for days, at least for the next 5 days, to try and stabilize our communities. The alderman said parts of the back of the yards in Brighton Park had become a virtual war zone. We can't expect our police, and I don't fault them at all, to be able to control this. Half of our neighborhoods are already obliterated. It's too late. Once they're done looting and rioting and whatever is going to happen tonight, God help us. What happens when they start going after residents, going into the neighborhoods, once they start trying to break down people's doors if they think they've got something? We know that people are here to antagonize and incite, and you've got them all pumped today. They're not going to go to bed at 8 o'clock. They're going to turn their focus on the neighborhoods. I've got gangbangers with AK-47s walking around right now, just waiting to settle some scores. What are we going to do? And what do we tell residents other than good faith people stand up? It's not going to be enough. When Lopez finished talking on the conference call, Lightfoot declined to respond. This is the same mayor who just the other day said she would not allow Trump to send in feds to, quote, terrorize residents. The local politicians, the aldermen of these neighborhoods are pleading just about a month and a half ago, pleading, please, they're terrorizing our neighborhoods. You need to do something. We need help. And when Trump says, I'm going to send in the feds, what does she do? No, you will not terrorize our residents. Yeah, technically the criminals walking around with AKs are residents of your city, but I don't think that's what Trump's goal was. Perhaps terrorizing the people who are committing crimes and hurting people is, well, you shouldn't literally terrorize them, but perhaps they should be scared and they don't want to commit crimes, right? This is a story that made me realize the people would much rather have strong law enforcement protecting their neighborhoods from the violence and destruction than the violence and destruction. And let it be known, man. Let me show you this story. Here we go, baby. Portland votes to wall off local police from federal law enforcement. This is it. First, the Portland police stood down. Federal agents started getting, attacked at the federal courthouse. The building was attacked. They came out, tried to disperse the crowd. How long until Portland or Oregon orders their law enforcement to suppress the law enforcement of the feds? Maybe that's the line. Maybe that's the line we won't cross. But we're getting closer. Right now, the city of Portland has placed new barriers between the Portland police and federal law enforcement, barring local police from communicating with the federal officers who have been deployed to the city. The resolution passed by City Council Wednesday instructs all members of the Portland Police Bureau to stop providing, requesting, or willingly receiving operational support from federal officers who arrived in the city under President Donald Trump's executive order. This includes embedding in a federal incident command center, sharing or receiving information with the federal officers, or policing protests alongside them. And here we go, man. So what do you think's happening just outside of Portland? With all of this violence going on, what do we get? Good old Brian Stelter to the rescue. Right-wing media plays up Portland protest violence. I want to read you this and break down the propaganda and explain to you why it doesn't matter. He says, when I saw Sean Hannity leading his new show with more violence grips Portland and scary video from the streets, I knew something was up. Right-wing media ramped up its coverage of scattered unrest in Portland last week at roughly the same time the federal officers descended on the downtown area. Hannity and other Fox hosts evidently decided that a small group of self-described anarchists suddenly deserved national news coverage. Now, I'm sure if people only watch CNN, they're reading this and going, Fox News, am I right? A small group of anarchists. Oh, here's a story from July 17th. 1,000 Portlanders protest federal policing 3 days before Stelter said this. For 55 days, there have been riots. 55. And Brian Stelter is like, suddenly they found out that a small group was worth covering. Let me fix that for you, Brian. Perhaps the media finally realized that violence rocking a city center for 55 days. Okay, well, at this time, it was 52 or so forgive me. And thousands had descended on this area. Since July 4th, the 39th day, they actually breached a courthouse. Maybe that's newsworthy. Apparently not to you, because Brian Stelter doesn't actually know what's going on in the world, because he doesn't actually report the news. He just complains about Fox. Here's what he says. One cynical way to see it. The Trump administration and Fox's talk show hosts picked Portland as a news stage for Trump's Law and Order show. Programs like Fox and Fred's had been prioritizing urban violence over the COVID-19 crisis for several weeks. Portland was just the latest news peg. You know that Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity both have the highest ratings in cable TV history. In quarter one, it was Hannity. In quarter two, it was Tucker Carlson. That's Fox News. Now, CNN's ratings are up as well, but something's happening where it's skewing in favor of Fox. Maybe it's because they're covering real news. When they say, when OPB, this is Portland's broadcasting, it's like their PBS or whatever, 1,000 Portlanders protest the federal policing. Here's a photo. 1,000. And then later, thousands more showed up. 3 days. And Brian Stelter is so out of touch. He says it's a small group of self-described anarchists. Huh. Why would someone trust CNN for their news source? They won't. I can show you multiple sources saying thousands protest in downtown Portland Monday. From July 20th, the same day Brian Stelter said a small group. Now, maybe he missed it. Maybe he's not been paying attention. That's all that matters. I can give you more than one source showing that thousands have been protesting, whatever you want to call it, in Portland, and that's why it's being covered. But the interesting thing about what Brian Stelter says here, he talks about how it's just downtown. He says, in an interview on Sunday's Reliable Sources broadcast, Atlantic staff writer Ann Applebaum suggested that the use of federal force in Portland is performative authoritarianism. The goal, in part, is to generate TV pictures for pro-Trump shows like Fox and Friends. This is being done partly for the photographs. This is really amazing, psychotic nonsense. You know what my source is for the news, for these videos on the ground? It's the protesters themselves. I'm not kidding. They are the ones filming and posting this stuff. There's also journalists from across the spectrum. New York Times, the Daily Caller, left-wing activist groups, right-wing protest groups or activist groups. They're all sharing these videos. We corroborate this stuff. And CNN they got their blinders on, or they're willfully lying. She says this is being done partly for the photographs. It's a way of messaging that we are in charge. We're doing something. We're restraining these forces of violence. And that's designed to appeal to a certain kind of voter who wants to see this control put onto contemporary events. Some viewers commented after the show that the deployment in Portland was more performative. Howard Feynman, the NBC News and MSNBC analyst, tweeted that it implies the authoritarianism on display in Portland is ineffectual and benign. Feynman argued that the display is anything but benign. They are fascist vanguard. Portland's reality check. As I said on Sunday's Reliable Sources, Portland officials are facing some real challenges with protests that devolve into vandalism and violence. But some of the right-wing accounts have been gross exaggerations. Take it from the reporters who live there. The Oregonian newspaper pointed out that the Fox-type narrative about Portland looks nothing like what actual residents experience day to day. Editor Campuzano wrote, many people who live in Portland heard over the past few days from worried relatives in other states who feared their loved ones in Portland might have been affected by the fires or caught in police crossfire as they went about their day. The images that populate national media feeds come almost exclusively from a tiny point of the city, a 12-block area surrounding the Justice Center and federal courthouse, and they occur exclusively during late night hours in which only a couple hundred or fewer protesters and scores of police officers are out in the city's, downtown. Those events hardly represent the daily life. I'm going to stop right there because he said a few hundred. I've already shown you OPB saying 1,000 and the Oregonian themselves. Look at this. This is Oregon Live, the Oregonian, thousands. So what are they saying? 3 days before this was published, it was thousands. And you also want me to believe that a square mile and a half is a small area? Maybe. And maybe they're just wrong. Maybe this is the point. Donald Trump is using these forces to make sure that it's only a 12-block area, 12-block radius, and that these thousands of people don't go to these neighborhoods. Maybe that's exactly what Trump wants. The people in Portland saying, well, I don't live in that area. It's all the violence is kept downtown. And maybe they're happy it's not happening in their, near their homes, near their apartments. That's the point. Guess what? This exemplifies exactly what the trap is. And I'll leave you with this. Take this one with you. Many people heard over the past few days from worried relatives in other states who feared their loved ones might have been affected. What can we take away from this? That it's all lies and that everyone's actually safe, or that people in other parts of the country hearing the news called their relatives and said, what's happening? What's happening? Are you okay? And they said, don't worry. It's all being contained in a 12-block radius. Huh. Really? So it's not affecting the suburbs and the neighborhoods? No. Thank God. I hope that's what happens here if the riots break out. It will be contained to a city center area and not come to the neighborhoods. I've shown you this already. The aldermen in Chicago are cussing out the mayor because the violence spread to the neighborhoods. Maybe this is what people are seeing. They're seeing that so long as Trump sends in these feds into city center areas, which are not as densely populated, their neighborhoods will remain safe. That's the trap. And because the left has become chaotic and they're not unified, there's no plan, they have no idea where they're going, Trump can easily implement his strategies that are working. So maybe part of that CNN story is right. It's a bit performative. Maybe Trump wants you to know, I will make sure the violence stays here. Think about it. The protesters are going to the courthouse, and he can tell you right now, don't worry. Don't worry. I'll keep their attention on us at the federal courthouse. We'll stay here. No one's going to go to your neighborhoods. And there it is. That's what people want. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at timcast.net. Check it out, and I will see you all then.